I never believed in the things people whisper about old hospitals, the creaks, the shadows that move when no one's watching, the stories that make your skin crawl. But what I'm about to share, you won't believe. And yet, every single word is true. It was just past midnight when I found myself alone in the empty corridors of St. Mercy Hospital. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting uneven shadows across the linoleum floor. Normally, a hospital at night feels quiet, sterile, even comforting. That night, it felt like something was breathing just beyond my vision. I was rounding on a patient, clipboard in hand, thinking about nothing more than finishing my shift, when I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost apologetic, like someone standing too close but speaking just for me. I turned, expecting a nurse or a janitor, but the hallway was empty. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing in a rhythm that didn't match mine. My heart thumped in my chest as I followed them, each step drawing me toward rooms I didn't remember seeing, doors that hadn't been there before. Something about the air felt wrong, heavy and metallic, like the hospital itself was holding its breath. And that's when I saw it, a shadow moving against the wall, too tall, too distorted, vanishing when I blinked. My mind screamed logic, but my gut knew better. There are things in this hospital that no one talks about, secrets the walls themselves seem desperate to hide. What I experienced that night is just the beginning. 10 terrifying tales wait, each one darker than the last. And as you listen, I promise, you'll see things you can't unsee. Things I only wish I could forget. Hospitals are supposed to save lives, places of healing, of hope. But some places seem to steal them instead. I've spent years investigating the dark corners of medical institutions, following rumors, old records, and whispered accounts from staff who would rather stay silent. What I've found is unsettling. Some hospitals carry a history so heavy it feels alive, as if the walls themselves remember every tragedy, every sudden, unexplained death. Consider the sheer number of lives passing through a hospital each day. The births, the recoveries, the farewells. Amid that constant flow of human vulnerability, tragedies are inevitable. But some deaths defy logic, leaving behind stories too strange to dismiss. Rooms where patients vanish only to be found hours later. Ambulances that arrive at night with no one inside. Nurses who swear they've felt hands on their shoulders when no one else is there. Real-life accounts like these aren't just urban legends. They're documented, reported, and yet somehow ignored by those in charge. Hospitals at night are particularly unnerving. By day, they hum with life, machines beeping in rhythm with bustling staff. But as the sun sets, the hallway is empty. Shadows stretch, and the air thickens. The line between healing and harm blurs. Silence amplifies every creak of the floorboards, every distant moan of an unseen patient. I've walked these corridors during the graveyard shift, alone. listening to the faint echoes that most would dismiss. And yet, some of those echoes are not easily explained. Over the years, I've collected stories from my viewers and community, people who have worked night shifts, patients who claim to have witnessed impossible events, and families who still fear returning to certain wards. These accounts converge in one unnerving truth. There's a side of hospitals that few dare to explore, a side where normal rules of life and sometimes death no longer apply. Tonight, you'll experience some of these firsthand. And as we step into the night shift world of St. Mercy Hospital, I need you to remember the darkness is patient and it's watching. What you're about to hear is only the first story of 10, and it's just enough to remind you that no place meant to heal is completely safe when the lights go out. I came back from my break around 2:15 a.m., coffee in hand, expecting the usual quiet hum of the night shift. That's when I noticed something was off. Room 312, where Mr. Thompson had been resting for the past week after a minor surgery, was empty. His bed was neatly made, monitors powered down, as if he'd never been there at all. At first, I assumed he'd been transferred or discharged, but the chart said otherwise. No notes, no orders, nothing. My stomach tightened. I checked the nurse's station, asking my colleague, Jen, if she'd seen him. Thompson? He was fine an hour ago, she said, brows furrowed. Why? Did you move him? No, I didn't touch him, I replied, my voice trembling slightly. He's just gone. Jen shook her head, as if dismissing my concern. Maybe you're imagining things. You've been working too many nights. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something in the air didn't feel right. The faint metallic tang, the slight chill that crept along my spine. I walked the halls, checking every nearby room. Each bed was full or empty, as it should be. Yet there was no sign of him anywhere. Not in the hallway, not in the lounge, not even in the stairwell. By now, my anxiety was rising. I spoke to the charge nurse, an experienced woman named Marla, hoping for some rational explanation. Thompson, room 312, she muttered, scanning the chart. Strange. He should be there. Maybe he left for a test? No orders, nothing. He just vanished, I said, my voice low, almost afraid to be overheard. Marla gave me a tight smile. Sometimes patients wander, I suppose. Check security if you must, but you're probably tired. Go grab some rest. Rest. She suggested rest, as if the hospital itself hadn't just swallowed a man whole. I went to the security office, my hands shaking, and asked to review the cameras. There were no cameras in the hallway outside room 312, at least none that captured anything usable. It was like he'd never existed. I returned to the empty room, staring at the pale sheets. The faint sound of a monitor beep somewhere distant caught my attention. But when I followed it, it stopped abruptly, leaving only silence. And then I felt it, like a presence hovering just beyond vision. Something waiting, watching, knowing. I rushed to the hall, yelling for help, but the echo of my own voice swallowed me. When Jen appeared moments later, she laughed nervously. "You've really lost it, huh? No one's missing. Room 312 is empty because the patient was discharged hours ago." Hours ago? The chart said otherwise. My stomach churned as I realized I was alone in a hospital that didn't quite follow reality. And as I glanced back at the empty bed, a shiver ran down my spine. Whatever took him, it wasn't done. This was just the first of the strange, unexplainable events that stalked the night. And if what happened to Mr. Thompson was a warning, then the horrors waiting deeper in the hospital were far worse. Story number 2 would prove that in ways I was only beginning to understand. Story number 2: The Shadow in the ICU. I thought it was exhaustion at first. The endless hum of ventilators, the constant beeping of monitors, the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes on the linoleum. It all blurs together after hours in the ICU. But then the shadows started noticing me. Or maybe I started noticing them. It began subtly. Dark shapes at the edge of my vision, vanishing when I blinked. Soft whispers drifting down the hallways, too faint to understand, yet unmistakably deliberate. I'd glance at a bed, and the silhouette of someone or something would be there, frozen, watching, dissolving the moment I tried to focus. "Hey, you okay?" one of the night nurses asked once. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off. "I think I'm just seeing things." She nodded, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "You're not the first to say that. Things happen here, oddly coinciding deaths. You see patterns, even if you don't want to." I didn't want to. I wanted to convince myself it was fatigue, imagination running wild. But the ICU has a rhythm all its own. And in the quiet hours, it speaks differently. Machines hum in time with something unseen. Shadows stretch toward you, as if gathering courage, learning the way you move, the sound of your breathing, the moments you're distracted. That night, I caught it clearly for the first time. A dark figure slipping along the far wall, just beyond the reach of the overhead lights. I froze, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to run. The figure tilted its head, almost curious, and then vanished into the corner of a room. My stomach dropped. It wasn't random. It was studying me. I moved from bed to bed, checking patients, trying to ground myself in routine. But the whispers followed, rising and falling, like a tide of voices just beneath comprehension. Nurses I trusted whispered warnings. Certain beds, certain patients. Things happen there, sometimes simultaneously, inexplicably. Deaths that align in ways no doctor can explain. Whispers that seem to announce them before they occur. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted, drained not from work, but from watching, listening, and feeling the weight of eyes I couldn't see. Whatever haunted this ICU wasn't mindless. It was intelligent, patient, and growing bolder. And yet, as unsettling as this was, It was nothing compared to what I would soon encounter. The ICU was only the beginning. In the hospital's deeper shadows, the nightmares waiting were far more relentless and far closer than I ever imagined. Story number 3. The Haunted Morgue. The cold here isn't just temperature. It's a weight that presses into your chest, seeps into your bones, and lingers long after you leave. I'd worked the night shift in the hospital for years, but nothing prepared me for the morgue. That place has a presence, an unshakable, malevolent awareness that whispers in corners and moves in ways that defy reason. It started subtly, as most of these things do. I was checking the storage freezers when I noticed the slab beside Mr. Thompson's. He who vanished from room 312 shifted slightly. I froze, heart hammering. The sheet over him hadn't moved. Nothing should have. Yet the slab had slid a few inches, as though something unseen had nudged it. I called Mark, a senior mortuary tech, over. "Did you see that?" I whispered, glancing nervously over my shoulder. Mark shook his head, his expression hardening. "Don't ask questions like that," he muttered, almost angrily. "Some things aren't meant to be noticed. You poke at them, you get trouble." "I'm not—" I started, but he cut me off. "Go back to your rounds. Stay out of here after midnight." I should have listened, but curiosity, or perhaps the need to make sense of the chaos, kept me there. That's when the whispers began. Soft, almost casual, like someone speaking to a friend in another room, yet directly in my ear. Names I recognized from my night shifts. Patients I had tended to, those who had disappeared, those who had died in mysterious circumstances. The voices didn't carry malice at first, but they promised knowledge, hinted at the why behind things no one wanted me to see. And then I saw movement, subtle and deliberate. A foot touched beneath a sheet, a hand twitched, a body shifted ever so slightly on its slab, as though testing its boundaries. I backed away, shaking. I had spent years seeing death in its most clinical form, but this was different. It was alive in a way it shouldn't be. Mark's warnings echoed in my mind. Some things are cyclical, connected. The vanishing patient, the ICU shadows, now this restless morgue. The hospital doesn't just contain life and death. It cultivates it, warps it, and occasionally it lets something slip through the cracks. I shouldn't have gone to the old wing that night. The morgue was only a taste of what lurked deeper, a warning in cold steel and whispered voices. And yet, some compulsion drew me onward, deeper into the hospital's dark heart, toward horrors I would never forget. Story number 4. The Nurse Who Never Left. Night shifts in St. Mercy usually follow a predictable rhythm. Monitor beeps, quiet footsteps, the occasional distant announcement over the PA. That night, I was making my rounds, clipboard in hand, when I first saw her. At first, I thought it was a new nurse I hadn't met yet. Her uniform crisp, movements deliberate, face calm, almost serene. Late night, isn't it? She said, voice soft but carrying a strange echo, like it was layered over itself. I blinked, expecting someone behind me, but the hallway was empty. Uh, yes, I guess, I muttered, unsure what I was seeing. She smiled faintly and continued down the hall, methodically checking doors, straightening beds, adjusting monitors. Her movements were impeccable, practiced, but there was something off. Her shadow didn't follow her naturally. It flickered, lagged, stretching unnaturally across the floor. Later, I noticed things moving when she passed. A pen rolling across a desk, a monitor flickering to life, sheets trembling as if a breeze had passed, though the air was still. I called out to her once, "Do you need help?" She paused, turned, and looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. "I can't leave," she whispered. "I didn't, I couldn't." Her voice broke, carrying a weight I couldn't name. It was then I realized she wasn't alive. She was a fragment of the hospital's past, replaying her final duties, endlessly trapped in time. Over the weeks, I learned more from whispers and accounts tucked in staff logs. She had died decades ago, collapsed during a shift, yet for reasons unknown, her presence lingered. Some nights she appeared in the same room, repeating the same gestures, checking the same equipment, tending to patients who had long since gone. I tried to follow her one night, to understand why she stayed, to reach out. She paused at room 312, the same room where Mr. Thompson vanished. She touched the doorframe gently, whispered a name I couldn't hear, and vanished into the shadows. And I realized something chilling. These hauntings weren't random. They followed a pattern, a thread connecting the vanishing patient, the ICU shadows, the restless morgue. Every spirit, every whisper, every shadow seemed to mark a truth about the hospital, a reality the living refused to acknowledge. And as I stepped back into the darkened hallway, heart pounding, I understood that these events were building towards something larger, something I was only beginning to comprehend. The patterns were there, and if I was observant, patient, and brave, or foolish, story number 5 would reveal how deeply the hospital's darkness had woven itself into every corner, every soul. Story number 5. The elevator to nowhere. It was supposed to be a simple trip. Floor 4 to floor 7, nothing more than a routine elevator ride. But the moment the doors closed, something shifted. The lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the stainless steel walls, and the soft hum of the motor warped into a low, vibrating pulse that seemed to echo from nowhere. I pressed the button for floor 7. The display blinked. 4, 5, 6. Then a floor I didn't recognize. Floor 6.5, or maybe 66? The numbers weren't consistent. Each time I pressed the emergency stop, the elevator responded as if it had its own mind, sliding silently between floors that shouldn't exist. I wasn't alone for long. Shadows pooled in the corners, indistinct figures that didn't quite step out but seemed to lean closer with each passing second. A faint whisper tickled my ear, voices I knew from my nights in the ICU, murmuring names. Patients long gone, colleagues I'd never seen. The elevator became a liminal space, existing somewhere between reality and nightmare. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the metal walls. Nothing, just the distorted hum and the feeling of being watched, analyzed. I tried pressing the buttons in a random sequence, desperate to regain control. Instead, the floor numbers sped past, skipping in impossible patterns. 7, 3, 12, 0, 312. My stomach dropped. Room 312. The vanishing patient. I could almost hear his last breath, faint as a sigh in the warped air. Minutes, or was it hours, passed in disorienting loops. The elevator opened once, revealing a hallway that didn't exist on any hospital map. Pale light spilled onto cracked tiles. Doors lined the walls, each labeled with names that made my blood run cold. Nurses who had long since died, patients who had vanished, ghosts of the morgue, all standing silently, staring. I tried to step forward, but the door snapped shut behind me before I could move, and the hum of the elevator consumed everything. My heart pounded as the walls seemed to stretch and bend, the numbers flickering like they were breathing. Time had no meaning here. Space had no rules. Finally, with a jolt, the elevator stopped on an ordinary floor. The doors opened to the familiar hum of the hospital, and the lights were steady again. But the feeling lingered. The gaze of something patient, intelligent, and relentless. I stepped out, shaking, swearing I wouldn't ride that elevator again. Yet part of me knew I had to. There were more floors, more wings, more secrets hiding just beyond the maps and charts. Story number 6 awaited, and whatever waited there promised to be far worse than the elevator to nowhere. Story number 6. The ICU apparition. Some patients never check out, and some never should have. That thought ran through my mind as I wheeled past the ICU. The corridor dimly lit, machines humming like restless insects. I'd seen strange things in this hospital before. Shadows that studied me, whispers that followed my steps, bodies moving against all logic. But nothing prepared me for him. I first noticed him lying in bed 3. An empty room by all records. Monitors were silent, sheets perfectly arranged. Yet, when I glanced closer, the outline of a patient became visible, thin and flickering like a bad projection. I shook my head. Great. Now I'm hallucinating ICU patients. Perfect. But he wasn't imaginary. The patient turned his head toward me slowly. Eyes hollow, yet focused. following my every step. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and decay. My brain, ever the sarcastic companion, muttered, "Well, at least it's not paperwork this time." I stepped closer, heart pounding, but every rational thought warned me to stop. I called for a nurse. No one came. The hallway remained unnervingly silent. I noticed the monitors now flickering on, displaying vitals that made no sense, pulse racing and stopping simultaneously, oxygen levels dropping and climbing in impossible patterns. I blinked, and the patient was closer. Or maybe I was further away. I couldn't tell. The lines between reality and nightmare blurred. I reached out, and my hand passed through him, cold and insubstantial, as if he was stitched from shadow and air. Then came the whispers. Names, dates, fragments of conversations from previous nights. The ICU seemed alive, fair, and amused at my terror. I could almost hear it chuckling at my disbelief. "Oh, you thought you knew this place?" Suddenly, the flickering figure smiled, and I felt a chill that seeped into my bones. It wasn't malicious, at least not yet, but it radiated something far more unsettling. Patience. The kind of patience that stretches across decades, that waits for you to falter, to make a mistake, to see too much. I backed away, my sarcastic inner voice faltering. "Yeah, great. Just a friendly ghost patient, nothing to panic about." But panic had already gripped me. I realized then that the apparitions weren't isolated incidents. Each vanishing patient, shadowy figure, restless corpse, and spectral nurse was part of a pattern, a hospital-wide curse I was only beginning to understand. The ICU wasn't just haunted, it was organized, calculating. It had its rules, its hierarchy of fear. And as I stumbled out of the room, shaking and exhausted, I knew the next story would reveal just how far this curse stretched, how deeply it penetrated the hospital's walls. Somewhere in the wings, something waited, aware of every step I took. And I couldn't help but wonder, was I merely observing the terror? Or had I already become part of it? Story number 7. The locked ward. The corridor was silent, save for the distant hum of machinery, until I heard it. A low, almost human groan coming from a set of double doors marked authorized personnel only. My curiosity, equal parts dread and compulsion, propelled me forward. The keycard reader was dead, wires exposed like the veins of some mechanical beast. Yet the doors were unlocked, as if inviting me inside. I slipped through, heart hammering, and immediately the air changed. Sterile bleach gave way to something metallic and foul, mingled with the faintest hint of something acrid, chemical. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, casting long, distorted shadows across rows of empty beds and overturned equipment. In the corner, I saw them. Slender, pale figures hooked to machines, their movements almost imperceptible, jerking in rhythms that defied biology. Tubes ran from their bodies into tanks filled with murky fluid. A voice whispered, impossibly close. They were never meant to leave. I spun around, but no one was there. I moved deeper into the ward, each step heavier than the last, every sound amplified in the unnatural quiet. Drawers of medical tools lay open, knives and scalpels gleaming as though freshly used. I caught glimpses of scrawled notes on clipboards, formulas, diagrams, patient IDs that didn't match any registry I knew. My stomach churned. This wasn't care. This was experimentation, or something worse. A sudden clang made me jump. A chair had toppled in the far corner, though no wind or person could have moved it. My breath came shallow, but I couldn't stop myself from peering closer. That's when I saw it. A figure in a hospital gown, pale, thin, staring directly at me with eyes that seemed hollow and infinite. The second I tried to speak, it disappeared, melting into the wall as if it had never existed. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over scattered medical charts. The ward felt alive, breathing, watching, calculating. I had glimpsed a horror so intimate, so controlled, that it left me dizzy and shaken. The doors behind me beckoned, but the presence in the room whispered that leaving didn't mean escaping. And yet, I couldn't look away. Something about the locked ward promised truths the hospital desperately tried to hide. Secrets tied to every vanishing patient, every shadow in the ICU, every restless soul wandering the halls. I left the ward that night with more questions than answers. My mind racing. The danger was unresolved, waiting, patient. And I knew the next story wouldn't just be a tale of shadow or whisper. It would be a personal encounter. Something that would force me to confront the hospital's darkness face to face. Story number 8. The Laughing Patient. I first noticed the laughter around 3 in the morning. A low, hollow chuckle that seemed to echo off the sterile walls of the hospital wing. At first, I assumed it was one of the night patients with a delirium episode. Common enough, especially after surgery or high doses of medication. But something about it felt wrong. I followed the sound down the dim corridor, my footsteps soft against the linoleum. Room 419. The door was closed. Yet the laughter poured through the cracks, uneven, almost mocking. I knocked gently. Hello? You okay in there? The laughter stopped. Silence. Then, a soft voice, almost sweet, said, "Why would I be okay?" I opened the door. The patient, a man in his 50s, sat upright in bed, eyes wide and unblinking, his mouth curved into a grin that didn't reach those eyes, and the sound of his laughter resumed, sharp and discordant. My stomach churned. "You're awake? Any pain? Medication?" He shook his head, chuckling. "I don't need anything. They've all left. Everyone always leaves." I froze. The words echoed a familiarity I couldn't place, like fragments from other nights. The vanishing patient, the ICU shadows, even the restless nurse repeating her rounds. The hospital had a memory, it seemed. And this man, He was part of it. I stepped closer. Who's left? What do you mean? His laughter softened, almost melodic. The walls remember. The machines, the beds. They know who belongs and who doesn't. He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made my hair stand on end. You see things. You notice things you shouldn't. I blinked, trying to ground myself in reality. I don't understand. You will, he whispered, and the laughter cut off like a switch. The room grew colder, the shadow stretching as if reaching for me. I wanted to leave, but my legs refused. His presence held me, quiet now, patient, waiting. A faint hum came from the monitors, irregular, almost singing. I realized then that the patterns I'd been tracking, the vanishing patients, the morgue, the nurse who never left, the elevator, were all connected. And this laughing patient, he was a reminder that the hospital's influence extended beyond walls, past logic, into the minds of anyone who noticed too much. I forced myself to step back, fumbling toward the door. He smiled then, a knowing, terrible smile. Be careful. You're seeing too much, and the next one will not be so forgiving. I left room 419 trembling, laughter still echoing faintly in my ears, a sound that had no right to exist in the middle of the night. Something malevolent was gathering, patient and intelligent, and I realized with a chill that the worst of the hospital's hauntings hadn't begun yet. Story number 9. The Night Shift Seance. We didn't mean to, but something answered. It started as a joke, whispered between exhausted night shift staff. Bet you can't summon the ghost of room 312, someone had said, half laughing, holding a lighter and a crumpled piece of paper with names scribbled on it. I should have walked away, but curiosity, or perhaps the hospital itself, drew me in. We formed a circle near the supply closet. Lights dimmed, murmuring names of patients long gone. At first, nothing happened. Just the faint hum of machines, the soft clatter of the janitor's cart down the hall. We laughed nervously, shaking our heads, pretending we weren't terrified. And then the temperature dropped. Breath condensed in the air. Lights flickered violently, as if protesting our intrusion. A shadow stretched across the wall, far too long and sinuous to be human. Whispers, sharp and urgent, cut through the hum of the hospital. Every name we spoke felt heavy, weighted with a presence we hadn't invited but could not deny. "Did you feel that?" whispered Jen, her voice trembling. I nodded, heart hammering. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against our chests, tightening our lungs. The papers in the center of the circle lifted, spinning slowly, as if guided by invisible hands. I think we shouldn't, Mark stammered, but the words were swallowed by a sudden, echoing laughter. Not distant, not faint. It surrounded us, filling the hall. A chorus of voices from every corner of the hospital. Some laughed like patients, some like nurses, others like the machines themselves. A figure appeared in the center of the circle, flickering in and out like a broken projector. It was the nurse who never left, reaching for us with hollow eyes, silent mouth moving as though speaking a warning we couldn't hear. Behind her, shadows stretched toward the ceiling, merging with those of the laughing patient, the vanishing figures from room 312, the twisted shapes from the morgue. Panic set in. We scrambled, knocking over chairs, tripping over cords. The door slammed shut on its own. I banged against it, shouting, but the shadows pressed closer, the whispers intensifying. The hospital itself felt alive, amused, waiting to see who would falter first. When the lights finally stabilized and the temperature returned to normal, we were alone. Or so we thought. The papers lay scattered, names smudged as if written in invisible ink. The air smelled faintly metallic, like blood. The circle was gone, but the presence remained, quiet, patient, watching. We left that night shaken, knowing the hospital had answered us. And whatever it wasn't finished. Story number 10 awaited the final account, where the darkness would confront me directly, leaving nothing unseen, nothing unexplained, and nothing safe. Story number 10. The Doctor Who Knows Too Much. I should have stopped following the whispers, the shadows, the vanishing patients. But something, curiosity, fear, or foolish courage, drove me toward the old wing, where the hospital's secrets were thickest. That's where I met him. The doctor who knew too much. I found him in an office cluttered with charts, old files, and photographs I couldn't recognize. Patients, staff, wards that no longer existed. His eyes, sharp and unsettling, seemed to see through me. "I've been expecting you," he said, voice calm, almost amused. What is all this? The shadows, the disappearances, the morgue, the laughter, I asked, heart hammering, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled faintly. "You've seen enough to understand the pattern, but understanding doesn't protect you. Saint Mercy doesn't just haunt. It consumes. It records. It remembers. Every patient, every nurse, every mistake leaves a mark. And some marks, they never fade." I realized then that every story I'd lived, the vanishing patient, the ICU shadows, the haunted morgue, the nurse who never left, the laughing patient, the locked ward, even the night shift seance, were threads in a tapestry far larger than I could comprehend. This hospital was alive in its own terrifying way, and he was its confidant, perhaps its servant, perhaps its victim. "Why show me this?" I whispered, dread coiling in my stomach. "Because," he said, leaning back, fingers steepled. You notice, you question, and that makes you dangerous to the system, to the balance. He gestured to the charts. Those who see too much are valuable or expendable, sometimes both. A shiver ran down my spine. As he spoke, the room shifted subtly. The lights dimmed, shadows pooled unnaturally around the corners, and the faint echo of patient laughter drifted from somewhere deep in the walls. I realized I wasn't just hearing stories anymore. I was inside them, part of a narrative the hospital was still writing. I tried to step back. The doctor's gaze didn't waver. "Don't leave," he said softly, almost a warning. "Not yet. The hospital has more to show you, more to test. And you may be next." Before I could respond, the office door slammed shut behind me, locking with a finality that felt alive. The temperature dropped. A figure flickered in the corner. One I had seen before, yet different, more menacing. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing, waiting. I knew then that this was only a glimpse of the truth. St. Mercy isn't just haunted, it's patient, it's intelligent, and it's far from finished. The doctor, the wards, the shadows, they are all part of a machinery of fear that refuses to stop, that may never let anyone truly leave. And as I stood there, heart hammering, I understood the worst part. The hospital doesn't need to chase you. You follow it willingly, step by step, drawn into its darkness. And there's no telling when or if it will ever let you go. As I finally stepped out into the cool night air, the hospital looming silently behind me, I felt no relief. The shadows hadn't stayed behind. They trailed me, patient and patient, settling into corners of my mind I didn't know could hold fear. Every memory of that night, the vanishing patient, the shadows in the ICU, the haunted morgue, the nurse who never left, the elevator that went nowhere, the laughing patient, the locked ward, the night shift seance, the doctor who knew too much, plays in a loop, each thread tugging at the next, reminding me that Saint Mercy is alive in ways most people can't imagine. I keep asking myself, what is real and what is part of the hospital's design to draw me deeper? Some nights I can almost hear the faint, echoing laughter of patients long gone, the hum of monitors that aren't plugged in, whispers brushing past the edges of my consciousness. The corridors I walked, the wards I explored, they are etched into me now. The hospital has a memory, and it refuses to forget. And that's the thing about places like this. They thrive in silence. They wait for someone curious enough to notice, observant enough to follow patterns, and bold or foolish enough to step beyond the threshold. Each shadow, each anomaly, each flicker of movement is a message, a warning, and a promise. If you've ever spent nights in a hospital, or any place that seems to hum with its own life, you might already know what I mean. Maybe you felt a presence just beyond sight, heard a whisper when no one was near, or glimpsed something that didn't belong. I want to hear about it. Share your experiences, your theories, even your nightmares, because these stories aren't just mine. They belong to anyone who has ever dared to notice, anyone who has felt the pull of the unseen. And yet, even as I write this, even as I recount every strange sound and impossible shadow, I know that Saint Mercy hasn't finished with me. Its secrets are still alive, waiting, patient. There are corners I never explored, rooms I never opened, floors I never dared ride the elevator to. The hospital endures, quietly growing, quietly watching, and perhaps patiently waiting for the next person to step inside and see too much. So if you think the story ends here, be careful, because the truth is, it never really ends. And sometimes, when the lights go out and the night is quiet, I swear I can hear the hospital calling my name once more.